The training grounds breathed with the restless energy of youth, boots pounding into dust, the metallic scrape of rifles clattering against stone. Commands cut through the air like whips, instructors barking cadence, recruits gasping to keep in step. Heat shimmered off the gravel, turning every movement into a trial, every bead of sweat into proof of endurance. The yard smelled of oil, dirt, and tension. For most, it was another day in a line of many, the grind of discipline carving them into soldiers. But not everyone was moving. At the far edge of the yard, beneath the shade cast by the old barracks wall, a woman sat with an M24 sniper rifle stretched across her lap. She worked with it the way a monk might work, with prayer beads, slow, careful, precise. Her hands did not tremble, did not fumble, did not rush. Each motion had a rhythm, a grace, the cloth sliding over steel in smooth arcs, the gleam of the bolt polished until it caught the sunlight like water. Where the others wrestled with sweat and exhaustion, she seemed apart, untouched by urgency. It was the rifle that drew the stares first. No recruit should have one, not here, not now. The standard issue was stacked along the racks. Mixed teens, some battered, some fresh from shipment. But an M24, that was different. That was a weapon with history, reserved for the ones who had already proven themselves, for the specialists whose patience and accuracy had saved entire squads from unseen death. In the hands of a recruit, it was an anomaly, a contradiction that no one dared approach too closely. Whispers curled like smoke around the yard. Some chuckled behind their hands, pointing at the absurdity of it, convinced she was some kind of joke, a misfit playing soldier. Others frowned, their eyes narrowing, unsettled not by the weapon itself, but by the way she handled it, as if it were more than steel and scope, as if it were something alive. Her motions were too familiar, too exact, as though she had done this 1,000 times before, not once fumbling, not once checking a manual. She ignored them all. The scrape of the cleaning rod sliding into the chamber was her only reply, the soft metallic click as it withdrew more eloquent than any defense. Sunlight caught the crown of her hair, but her face remained still, unreadable. There was no performance in her work, no show to earn admiration or provoke envy. It was ritual. It was memory. It was hers. Recruits who had been bold enough to speak her name never said it above a murmur. Lena? No. Mara? No. They weren't sure. Names flickered, traded like contraband stories around bunks. Some claimed she had carried that rifle out of a firestorm, dragging it through ash and rubble. Others swore she had taken it from the hands of a fallen sniper, inheriting not just the weapon, but the ghost of its reputation. The truth was never clear, and the uncertainty only fed the tension. She remained still, and the rifle gleamed cleaner with every pass of the cloth. The chuckles grew quieter as the minutes stretched, replaced by an unease no one wanted to name. Her silence was heavier than the weight of shouted commands, heavier even than the rifle balanced in her arms. Silence in the yard usually meant weakness, retreat. But hers was different. It was an anchor, drawing every glance back toward her, reminding them all that there are some mysteries better left unmocked, and some weapons that are never truly at rest. Her name passed again, softer this time, carried on whispers that died before reaching her. Not one of them knew the truth. Not one of them dared to ask. Colonel Marston walked into the training yard the way he always did, measured steps, chin lifted, eyes scanning without urgency. He had seen this scene countless times before. Recruits stumbling through their drills, rifles clutched like unwieldy toys, sweat dripping into the dust. The cadence of shouted commands rang familiar, the thud of boots striking the ground in ragged rhythm no different from yesterday or the week before. To him, it was routine, a rotation of discipline grinding raw youth into something resembling soldiers. He carried himself with the weight of 2 wars etched into the creases of his face. His hair had gone to iron, his shoulders a little stiffer, his lungs rasping faintly from too many years breathing sand and smoke. But his eyes still cut sharp. They missed little, and what they caught, they never forgot. That was why his stride faltered. He had turned to sweep the perimeter when he saw it, the woman sitting apart, her movements slow, deliberate, precise. The rifle stretched across her lap was unmistakable to anyone who had spent their life around weapons. The M24, no ordinary issue, no practice gun for raw recruits to fumble over. But it wasn't just the rifle that stopped him cold. It was the mark carved into the stock. Faint but undeniable. A circle etched around a single vertical line, burned in by fire, blackened by time. Marston's chest tightened. He knew that symbol. Every soldier who had fought in Kargil, who had trudged the ridgelines of Afghanistan, who had heard whispers along the convoy routes of Iraq, they all knew it. The Deadeye mark. The signature of a sniper whose confirmed kills were more than numbers on a board, whose bullets had cut down threats before they devoured entire battalions. A legend, half myth, half flesh, spoken of in the hushed reverence reserved for saints and ghosts. The colonel froze, not because of the rifle itself, but because of the possibility it carried. Could she be the one? Could this quiet figure polishing steel in the shadows of the yard truly be the phantom who had disappeared from reports years ago, leaving behind only fragments of stories that veterans traded like relics? The yard shifted around him without words. Recruits sensed the change before they understood it, the way animals feel a storm pressing down from the horizon. Conversations stuttered to silence. Boots that had been stomping in rhythm slowed. Even the laughter that had bubbled from one corner over a poorly executed drill died in throats. No one had given an order, but the hush spread like a command carried on the wind. Marston's boots ground into the gravel as he took a step closer, his gaze locked on the etching. Memories pressed hard against the back of his mind. Nights when a single, well-placed shot had spared his men from ambush, mornings when reports carried the word sniper scrawled in frantic ink, entire platoons swearing they'd been saved by a ghost. He remembered the unanswered question that always lingered. Who was it? Whose hands carried that impossible precision? And now here, in the unremarkable dust of a training yard, the possibility sat with calm hands, polishing steel as if the world were not holding its breath around her. The recruit's eyes darted from Marston to the woman, confusion mingling with unease. They didn't understand what he had seen, but they understood enough to be afraid of it. Respect unearned, instinctual began to creep into their postures. Their laughter would not return. Marston drew in a slow breath, his lungs burning with old fire, and he let his voice rumble low into the silence. "Where did you get that rifle?" The question was not curiosity. It was recognition clawing its way into the open, demanding an answer. The rifle lay across her lap like a relic, its weight familiar, its silence heavier than the whispers that circled her. The cloth moved in steady arcs, her hands tracing over grooves and scratches etched deep into the wood and metal. Every mark told a story that no one here could read, though they stared at it with the same uneasy reverence one might give an artifact pulled from a battlefield shrine. She never lifted her head, never acknowledged the attention pressing down on her like the midday Sunday. She simply polished, methodical, and patient, as though the act itself was a vow she had no intention of breaking. The recruits couldn't help themselves. They leaned closer in clusters, their eyes darting between one another as if the courage to speak might somehow be borrowed. They had heard the stories before, snippets whispered through barracks halls, retold around mess hall tables until fact blurred with imagination. A sniper who never missed. A shadow that moved along ridgelines where no soldier could tread. A single shot ringing out in the dark, ending an ambush before it began, saving dozens with the precision of one. But what haunted them most were the endings to those stories, always the same, always abrupt, vanished, disappeared after a mission that should have claimed them all. No body, no name. Just the Deadeye mark, left scorched into the stock of a rifle, carried into new battles by hands unseen. The rifle before them carried those scars in plain sight. Nicks along the forend from shrapnel, burn marks across the stock where fire had licked it but failed to consume it. Faint grooves near the trigger guard, worn by years of impossible survival. Each blemish was proof that the weapon had not lived through one war but many. And as the recruits stared, they began to see the same language written across the woman's skin. The faint ridges along her arms, the thin white line beneath her jaw. She bore her history the way the rifle did, quietly, unflinchingly. Still she said nothing. The scrape of metal against cloth, the click of the bolt drawn back and set forward again, spoke in place of words. Every sound rang louder in the silence, every motion measured with the calm of someone who had no need to explain herself. To the recruits, her silence was unbearable. They whispered to each other, daring anyone to ask her outright. But none found the courage. The weight in the air was too much, pressing down on their lungs, making even the boldest feel small. Colonel Marston stood unmoving, his gaze locked not on the woman, but on the mark seared into the rifle's side. Memories pressed against him with unrelenting force, convoys saved by an unseen shot, men swearing they had been plucked from death by a ghost, entire missions turned from disaster by one pull of a trigger. He had buried too many soldiers to believe in fairy tales, yet here was a weapon that carried proof of legends. The recruits shifted under the gravity of his silence. They knew something was unfolding before them, something rare, something dangerous. The woman remained still, her hands continuing their careful ritual, the rifle gleaming brighter with each pass of the cloth. It was as if she could polish the ghosts out of it, though everyone watching understood that the ghosts would never leave. At last, the colonel's voice cut through, rough as gravel yet steady as stone. "Where did you get that rifle?" The words landed like a shot in the yard. The whispers stopped. The air itself seemed to hesitate. And for the first time, the woman paused mid-motion, her hands resting on the scarred wood, the silence around her deepening into something that felt almost holy. She did not move at first. The rifle rested across her lap, her fingers still curved around the stock, the cloth trapped between her hand and the steel. The recruits held their breath, waiting for her to flinch, to explain, to stumble into the kind of excuses they expected from anyone caught under the colonel's gaze. Instead, she lifted her head slowly, her eyes meeting his with a steadiness that cut deeper than defiance. They were storm-gray eyes, unflinching, carrying weight instead of fire. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, low, certain, unshakable. "It was given," she said. A pause, deliberate, stretched between them, by those who didn't come back. The words struck harder than a rifle's crack. They carried no dramatics, no attempt to impress or shame. They were a truth delivered like a stone laid upon a grave final, immovable. Around her, the recruits shifted as if the ground itself had tilted beneath them. Some blinked rapidly, suddenly unable to meet her gaze. Others straightened without knowing why, as though their bodies recognized what their minds had not yet grasped, the authority of someone who had bled in places they had only heard described in lectures. Colonel Marston's jaw tightened, the lines around his mouth hardening. He lowered his head, not in shame, but in recognition. He had seen men return broken, carrying wounds that carved through flesh and bone. He had also seen the weapons left behind, the rifles stacked in silence after battles gone wrong, names written in chalk on tags that would fade with rain. He knew what it meant to inherit a rifle that did not belong to you. It was no prize. It was no trophy. It was a ledger, a burden, a weight to be carried when others could not. And this rifle, scarred and seared, bore more names than most cemeteries. He remembered the stories, the impossible shots, the convoy saved at Mara, the ambush that had turned into a massacre everywhere, but on the hill where a single sniper's eye had held the line. He remembered the mission that had swallowed that sniper whole, erasing them from records, leaving only the dead-eye mark as proof that they had ever existed. Now that mark gleamed in the sunlight, and the woman holding it gleamed with it, not as a symbol of glory, but as a witness. She had survived when others hadn't, and she carried the weapon not as a soldier flaunting skill, but as a memorial, each scar etched into its frame matched by one carved across her own body. The recruits who had laughed earlier now stood taller, shoulders pulled back, spines stiffened. They realized, with the dawning chill of humility, that they had mistaken silence for weakness, that they had mocked scars that meant someone else had lived to see home. Respect did not erupt in applause, nor in cheers. It filled the yard in the kind of silence that binds soldiers tighter than words ever could. She rose then, the M24 balanced against her shoulder. Each step forward was steady, deliberate, the kind of stride that belonged to someone who had already walked through fire and had no need to prove it. The rifle caught the sunlight one last time, no longer just steel and glass, but a ledger of lives saved, of debts carried, of ghosts remembered. Marston's gaze followed her, his throat tight with the memories that never left him. The recruits watched as if a legend had taken form in front of them, no longer a whisper, no longer a ghost story traded in bunks. She passed through their silence like a blade through still water, leaving no ripples, only weight. And when she was gone, the silence remained dense, reverent, the kind of silence that would follow them into every march, every drill, every battlefield. It was the silence of understanding that some strength speaks loudest without raising its voice. It was the silence that hits harder than gunfire.